Hi everyone, welcome on back to my channel. So today I just wanted to discuss hair growing away from our locks. And of course, if you're not new to my channel, you know that I deal with this in my own lock journey, and I was curious about why does this necessarily happen to some of us. Believe it or not, it is actually not uncommon for you to have about 1 to 3 inches of loose hair, especially depending on your maintenance time in between, your routine for maintaining your locks, especially if you have fine hair or you have hair of a looser type of texture. Now that makes a bunch of sense to me because with my journey, I've said it many times in many videos that I definitely feel like the hair in the front of my head is of a looser texture than the hair that's growing in the back of my head, which I feel is like a coilier, tighter texture. So that's why every month I'm seeing the hair growing away from my locks at the top of my head, instead of seeing it so much of it forming or growing away from my locks from the back of my head, because the texture is definitely different and softer. And of course, if your hair is of a softer type of texture, it's not going to lock as quickly as you would like it to. So it's kind of understandable that you may see this hair separating from the lock every month, depending on if you have that type of texture or if you have fine hair. Another misconception or thing that you may have thought if you are suffering from your hair growing away from your locks is that, oh my God, I'm suffering from breakage. And I know that I actually thought that. I want to say around month number 3 is when I started to notice that the growing away from my locks was happening. And automatically you're going to think something is wrong with your hair and that it's breaking off, because why is this hair out of the lock all of a sudden, But there is a definite difference between breakage and just healthy hair that is growing away from your locks. If you're seeing a significant amount of hair, and I mean about 1 to 3 inches of hair, of course this depends on the length of time you go in between retwisting or maintaining your locks. But if you're seeing a healthy, significant amount of hair and you're able to actually add that hair back into the lock without any issues, then you're fine. That means you definitely just have healthy hair growing away from the locks. But if you are suffering from breakage, you're going to notice shorter lengths of hair, and they're going to be much more difficult for you to combine or add back into that lock. And that's when you're going to realize, okay, then I must be suffering from breakage, because the hairs are much shorter and they won't be as easy for you to actually add back into your lock without a problem. So what are some of the things you can do to combat, the issue of having your hair grow away from your locks? Well, you could have a consistent maintenance routine. And what that means is you would, retwist or interlock or whatever your method of maintenance is for your locks. You would do it pretty often, about 4 to 6 weeks to be exact if you're retwisting, and about 6 to 9 weeks if you're interlocking, and so on and so forth. But you definitely need that consistency, because you don't want to go too long with the hair growing away from your locks and then you do suffer from some type of breakage, or you suffer from matting and tangling, which has happened to me several times on my journey, dealing with the matting and the tangling and the combining of the locks. And especially if you're somebody who loves your parting, you definitely don't want to go too long where you have that issue of the combining and the tangling, and then you can't separate your hair enough to find those parts that you had from the beginning of your journey, if that is an actual concern for you. Now, some people don't care about parts, so that may not be an issue, but if it is something that you care about, your maintenance needs to be consistent on a consistent basis every 4 to 6 weeks. to maintain that hair and make sure it's continually added back into the lock. You may also decide to use a tool like a crochet needle to help you add the hairs back into the lock and try to keep them in there as the locking process is progressing. And I actually did try this method and it did work for my locks. And there's also the braiding method that you can try, which is, braiding those loose hairs into the existing lock to see if that will hold the hair also in place as your hair and your lock are going through the locking process. And to be honest, of course, with your consistency of your maintenance and whichever method you decide to use, you may have to continue to use these methods and be consistent with your maintenance throughout your entire lock journey, because maybe you just have the type of hair that does not conform to staying within the lock, which is something to be aware of. Of course, I've said many times before, I feel like as my journey has progressed, that I've noticed the hair in the back of my head is now more trained. It is starting to actually stay within the lock and not separate like it used to. But the hair in the front of my head is definitely not catching on as quickly as the hair in the back of my head has done so. So I don't know how long I'm gonna have to keep adding the hair back into my lock every month or whenever I decide to maintain my locks, but it may be the lifetime of my lock journey. It depends on if you're able to get that hair to be trained into the lock. It will depend on how long do you have to keep up this maintenance and these different methods of maintaining your locks. So there's actually a benefit of having your hair grow away from your locks, believe it or not, depending on personal preference. But for me, it is definitely the fullness that it gives, and it definitely makes my hair look very full, and it fluffs out my locks in a way that makes them appear fuller than they are, especially because I have fine hair. And I actually do like that, within the month when my retwist wears off, which is not very long. It usually lasts about 5 to 7 days depending on the month and what I'm doing. But when that happens, I actually am in love with my hair. And I never thought I was going to be a person that didn't necessarily love the unkept look, to be honest with you, before I started my lock journey. But that look has grown on me so much throughout my journey, especially since I've realized I have this issue. But that is definitely a benefit of having your hair grow away from your locks. It definitely gives you that semi-freeform type of look in your root area, especially if you go a long time, I feel like, without retwisting the loose hairs. And it kind of gives you that look. If you definitely love that freeform type of look, you kind of get the best of both worlds if you're a person that retwists and then you have the issue of your hair that grows away from your locks. So that's definitely something to think about and a benefit that you may not realize that you actually have with this issue. So, of course, with anything, can always be a problem. And like I said earlier, breakage is definitely one problem you could be having. But another issue is that if you're not incorporating the hair properly, depending on your maintenance of your locks, if you're not incorporating that hair properly back into the lock that it belongs to, you can suffer from thinning or even breakage of the entire lock itself. And I've actually spoke about this in a video that I did where I did notice that my hair was thinning from 2 locks that I had in particular. And I knew it was definitely because I was not adding the proper amount of hair back into that lock that belonged to those 2 locks. So it's something you definitely have to be careful of, especially if you are somebody who doesn't necessarily care about parts, I want to say, because I am somebody that is trying to maintain my parts, but I will admit that I'm not maintaining my parting as strict as I used to. So sometimes I get a little lax and I'm like, this seems like a good portion of hair. It's not perfectly straight, but it's good enough, and I'll just add it back in without question. But I noticed that doing that definitely has its problems with my locks. So just be careful when you're maintaining your locks and adding the hair back in. Make sure it's a significant amount of hair, especially depending on your parting, if you have parting, or if you don't, just depending on the size of that lock. And is that hair going to be enough to strengthen that lock when it starts to go through that locking process, so it doesn't thin out or break off? Of course, I would say definitely do your research, and of course, different strokes for different folks. Everybody's journey is going to be different, and everyone's interpretation or way of maintaining the hair growing away from their locks is going to be different also. And I don't think there's any wrong answer, because if it works for you in your journey, then definitely it is the right solution. Definitely if you're dealing with the hair growing away from your locks, I definitely wouldn't want you to feel like this is a horrible issue to deal with. And I will admit, at first I thought it was something that was probably one of the worst things in my journey, but I've come to realize that this is my hair texture, and if I think something's wrong with that, then I'm definitely thinking something's wrong with my hair in general. And with whatever journey you're on, you're definitely going to learn your hair, and you may learn the things that go wrong more than the things that are good, you know? So it's like once you hit a bump in the road, you kind of just look at it, analyze it, figure out a way to deal with it. And when you do figure out the answer, you just keep going, and you just realize like, hey, this is how my hair operates and performs, and this is how it's going to be. And I wouldn't let that deter or derail me from continuing my lock journey. And I know sometimes when things like this come up, people automatically want to quit and they just want to say that their journey was a waste of time and it didn't, perform the way they wanted it to perform. But definitely, this is something you can maintain. And it definitely doesn't make me feel any type of way about my journey. It actually makes me appreciate my journey even more, and wanting to continue to learn even more about my hair and see how it will continue to progress on my journey. So I hope you all enjoyed this video, and I thank you so much for watching. Take care. Bye guys.